Welcome to Bamfordrose and another question of the week. This week it's another widely seen issue of PCV valves on V12 engines, and this will be the same failure for an 04 DB9, 510 horsepower V12V DBS, any V12 engine of that Ford derived era. So PCV valves, or positive crankcase ventilation, is a one-way valve which allows air from within the engine. So your crankshaft has been rotating, connecting rods, pistons been going up and down. This creates a volume of air that needs to be moved away from the engine or out of the engine. If it was to stay inside the engine, then there'd be a big parasitic loss for the engine to overcome, which will zap performance. So all this air which is normally created needs to get out of the engine, but the environmentalists don't like gases like that outside the engine. So back in the 70s, when this first bit of legislation came in, you've got to feed all of your breathing gas back into the inlet manifold so the engine can consume its own gases which are laden with hydrocarbon because it's been inside the sump area. So that's been going on since the 70s, nothing new there. And this one-way valve, what it does is allows that gas to move from the bottom end of the engine into the inlet manifold, and the one-way valve stops any oil from being carried across in the air, because as that air that the crankshaft is whipping up moves from outside the sump, it's going to have picked up some globules of oil, and the one-way valve just stops that oil going through to the inlet manifold. Obviously you don't want to burn oil in this recirculated air. That'd be bad for a number of reasons. So what happens on the Aston is that these valves repeatedly fail. They're rubber beak type valves within a rubber pipe, and what happens is they go brittle over age. As they age, they get brittle, and then they stick open. So now there is no one-way valve, and the engine is consuming a little bit of oil that's picked up with the normal breather gas. Even in the worst case, if the valves are stuck open, I don't think oil consumption is going to go anything over half a litre per 1,000 mile. But you can just see on cold start a whiff of blue smoke, and that's telltale sign that the valves have failed. Unfortunately, on a few cases, if people are doing high mileage, they don't regularly check their oil, and if you've done a few 1,000 mile at half a litre, then you've only half a litre consumption, then you've only got a drop from the maximum mark, which is at about 12.5 litres, down to the tip of the dipstick, which will be about 7 litres. And it's at that point, if you've only got 7 litres in the sump, going down a motorway at 2,000 or 3,000 RPM, the rear big end bearing for cylinder 6 and 12 is the last in the oil feed circuit. That runs dry, engine seizes up, and yeah, that's best avoided. So the PCV valves should be checked at service, and the easy way to do this is to look at the air filter, because if the air filter has got staining of oil on the element has acted like blotting paper, then you know the PCV valves have failed, because the circuit goes from the engine to the inlet manifold pre-throttle. So the gravity will mean that the oil drops down into the airbox, therefore you know if the air filter has got some oily witness marks on that the PCV valves have failed. It needs the inlet manifolds off to change them, and there's one way of buying the whole kit. It's about £550 off Aston, or individually you can go and find those valves and just try and graft them into the pipe work. Just to clear up engine breathing, probably heard people say if an engine is worn out, oh, it's breathing, and that's something separate. What will happen there is the combustion gas on top of the piston on an engine that's worn or breathing is going to seep past the piston rings. That's going to go into the sump, and there's going to now be some positive crankcase pressure because combustion gas has been forced into the sump, and that's going to force that air and oil out of the block into the PCV valves. So that is an engine that's breathing because it's worn out. But that's not the normal recirculation of air that we're talking about, that the positive crankcase ventilation system does as its normal job.